Hey guys, it's Kevin from Spiritus Systems, and today I'm joined by Braxton from Spiritus Systems, and we're going to get into what type of sighting system you should select for your rifle. We're probably going to have some controversial opinions on the topic and some that you may disagree with, so stay tuned.
Faster!
All right, so the first sighting system that we're going to talk about is going to be the red dot, which I think is kind of like the simplest thing that we can start with. So Braxton, what are some of the pros that you like about the red dot system?
So this is more of a legacy dot at this point. I think they are the simplest to learn how to use. They are the simplest to use even once you are a more advanced shooter. They're very user-friendly. They're very light, not particularly this one because of its age. But there are some really, really light red dot options out there. They're extremely affordable at this point. And I would say you probably have more red dot options than any other kind of combat or practical shooting oriented optic. Battery life would be a big one. Back into ease of use. Red dots have unlimited eye relief.
What are you talking about exactly when we mention eye relief?
I guess the simplest way to put it would be the distance that your eye needs to be, or the proximity to the ocular lens. So if something has very short eye relief, you need to be very close right here. If it has unlimited eye relief, as long as I am behind the optic, I can see through it. The simplicity, the lightweight, the affordability would be the primary broad stroke pros to me.
You did mention battery life, which some may see as a con because it does rely on a battery, and when the EMP hits, your battery's not going to work. Your sighting system's not going to work. That is a con to some people. To me, it's not really a con. It's actually a pro because these style of optics get tens of thousands of hours of battery life. So we're talking about years of battery life.
Right, and having an illuminated reticle especially, or an illuminated aiming solution of any kind, daylight or nighttime, like your dusk and dawn kind of stuff. Etched reticles, which we'll get into later, are nice, but having actual illumination can be the difference between you being able to see your actual point of aim.
And another big pro about it that we mention is the weight, especially with the modern age, with all the stuff that we're putting on rifles, lights, lasers, it starts to really add up. So having a lighter aiming solution can really help for fatigue, as like you're carrying this thing all day, every day. Where does this not really stack up to something like having a scope?
I'd say you have no magnification. So if magnification is a must, you're either going to have to bolt it on with a magnifier, or you're just going to have to do without. They do rely on a battery. They are electronic. Those are really my only two immediate cons.
I would say the big con is PID, or positive identification at distance. You just have no magnification, so you're not going to be able to tell really at distance what you're looking at. And also trying to hit something at distance can be difficult if you can't even see it. So that being said, we do have an option to add a magnifier behind the standalone red dot. So this rifle here has the SIG Romeo 4T Pro red dot, which actually does give you some of those reticle options as far as like having a circle with a dot and then a series of dots as like aiming points for distance. And this one's on a Unity fast mount. It's a little bit higher than you would see than the other red dot. And then we have an EOTech magnifier on a Unity flip to center mount. So what do you find is the advantage to having this setup?
So this is kind of the bolt-on performance that I mentioned as a con for no magnification, is you are going to have to add something behind a red dot to augment adding magnification. And this is what that looks like. This one's on a QD mount, so we can take this off. And the big pro to me is just the scalability, is that we can just pull this off and stow it in a pouch. We can take it off and leave it at home if we know we're not going to need it. That can be a day-night thing, that whatever procedure works for you. I like the scalability of a magnifier.
Some of the cons with the magnifier is going to be that eye relief. You now added eye relief to the red dot.
Not only did you add eye relief, you added very short eye relief, which we can see that it's about level with your ocular lens and your charging handle. So we're getting into like ACOG territory, which is probably the most infamous of the optics with bad eye relief or short eye relief.
Now we have a different mount height here. What is the advantage or con to having that height on the mount for the red dot?
So what we looked at earlier was a lower third mount, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.7 inches from top rail to center of optic. With the tall mounts, it's going to make it easier to get behind with a gas mask. It's going to make it easier or simply possible to get behind and use with head-mounted night vision. And then even just things like being in the prone, wearing a helmet with optics that are as low as the lower third, even an absolute co-witness being even lower. I've certainly pushed my helmet up with my optic just to try and get behind it. So like your field environment, a tall mount is more appreciated than one might think.
But with that, you are going to have more height over the bore when you are shooting. So if you're shooting something very close, you're going to be shooting low.
Yeah, the height over bore with a 226 is pretty significant. I guess that's important to note with mount heights. The advertised figure for all these mount heights is from the top rail to the center of the optic. So your barrel is not where your top rail is. So with height over bore as a consideration, that is something that you need to A, try and measure, and then B, actually shoot it and see how it groups at different distances.
One thing we didn't hit on yet about the red dot is that a lot of people who have astigmatism don't like red dots because they will get a starburst or a streak of some sort when looking through it. It's one of the reasons I have to wear glasses is because of astigmatism. Red dots really haven't bothered me. I've always been able to use them, but some people's eyes are going to be worse for them than others. So it is something to take into consideration. If you are new to this and you just got a dot and you see like a streak or something, it's probably not the dot that's wrong. It's your eyes that are messed up. Okay, so I think we kind of covered everything with the red dots. Let's get into the holographic sight now. So here we have the holographic style of sight. This one is an EOTech. What are some of the things that you like about the holographic style of sight?
If there was an emphasis on passive aiming through head-mounted night vision, I think EOTech specifically and holographic sights, with the size of their windows, the lack of notch filter or that blue tinge that you have in the lens on red dots, I think these are the best for passive aiming use. That's a little subjective, but there is a lot of light transmission and the reticle comes through very cleanly. With this one specifically, there's actually a night vision button on there rather than running through the dial. So you can just kind of switch modes. So that's pretty neat for passive use. The other one would be a lot of magnified use. EOTechs, to a lot of people, are constantly a little fuzzy. They're always symmetrical, but your holographic sights with a series of tiny dots projecting an image has kind of a fuzzy, broken effect, but it is, at the very least, consistent and symmetrical.
Yeah, I'll say without glasses, the EOTech is very, very fuzzy to me. But with glasses on, it becomes much more sharp.
It's always a little apparent to me that it is a series of dots, but once I'm actually shooting and I'm looking through that reticle and not looking at it, it kind of becomes a non-issue.
Let's talk about the reticle itself. It's more than just a dot.
Right, so this one specifically, and there's other holographic sights out there, and there's different models of EOTech as far as reticles go that are single dots or the donut of death with the center dot and a BDC. So there are options, but the traditional one is the 65 or 68 MOA ring with is it a 1 MOA center dot?
Yeah.
So you have a really precise aiming point and you have a really large, rather imprecise aiming point in the circle. So you can use them independently. You can use one to funnel your eye into the smaller aiming point. You can also use the bottom or the top of that circle, which has not necessarily graduations, but demarcations or lines. You can get some kind of swaggy dope off of those.
Up close, some people prefer that style of reticle. You just kind of have to get behind it a little bit and see if you actually prefer using that style of reticle versus something like a simple red dot.
The first con that comes to mind probably for both of us is battery life.
Yeah, battery life is a big thing with this. You're talking about like hundreds of hours versus tens of thousands of hours.
Yeah, so you're getting a drastic reduction in battery life. These are just more power hungry optics. Just the way the tech works, it needs more juice, it needs a bigger battery, and it doesn't last as long. So if those pros are worth it to you, especially if you're just using the government's batteries, that's cool. You can just throw a new one in every day. But if you're funding this yourself, that's going to be a lot of CR123s. They do have auto shut off on most holographic sights, which pro and con. You just have to remember at whatever interval, if you don't run one of the adjustment buttons, it's going to shut itself off to preserve that battery life.
All right, so that about wraps it up for the non-magnified options that we have. Now we're going to get into LPVOs and Prism style of optics. So now we have the LPVO, which stands for low power variable optic, which means that there is a range of magnification. Low meaning it's going to be 1x on the low end, and they can vary from going from 1 to 4 power. Like this one is a Vortex Viper PST Gen 2. It's a 1 to 6 power. There are others that are 1 to 8 power, and even some that are 1 to 10 power. And I think that's about where we're maxing out with the LPVO category, is that 1 to 10. What are the benefits of having just an LPVO by itself?
In some ways, all your eggs are in one basket. It's a singular sighting system. It's not scalable, but it is, from a different perspective, it's an all-in-one solution. So if you have a low power variable, until you get out to pretty extreme distances, depending on your PID requirements and whatnot, you have everything under one roof, so to speak. So it's an inline system. There's one mount. There's nothing that you need to add or take off. And you have your 1 power for your bad breath distance stuff. And then you have 6, 8, 10, your 1 to something, whatever the top end is. You have that magnification at the turn of a ring.
Eye relief on this is going to be a factor. It's going to be better in most cases than the red dot and magnifier.
Yeah, a dedicated scope that has a bottom end of 1x is traditionally going to have better or more forgiving eye relief than a magnifier. Magnifiers are better than they used to be, but a dedicated scope with 1x in mind definitely has more forgiving eye relief.
With that being said, at 1x, it's not going to be as good as the red dot.
It's true. Yeah, because it does have eye relief, whereas the red dots had unlimited eye relief. There was no parallax or very little parallax to be fixed. So in this case, this one has a fixed parallax. Your higher power scopes will have adjustable parallax, but these are fixed by the manufacturer. So eye relief, parallax, you'll hear people talk about eye box or scope shadow. Getting behind the gun consistently is going to be infinitely more important than it is with a red dot. Red dot, you could hold the rifle out in front of you like a pistol, and you could conceivably shoot it. Not that it's a good idea, but it's possible.
So another thing about the scope is that it has an etch reticle, so we're not reliant on the battery. Most of these scopes do have illumination, but personally, I really don't use the illumination on scopes like this. A lot of people place a lot of emphasis on the illumination, but especially with a second focal plane optic, I don't think it's that much of a deal, and I don't really use it.
Yeah, I don't use the illumination for much other than what we talked about with the red dots was dusk and dawn, when it's just like gray blue outside and it's hard to distinguish even a bold reticle. Then I might turn the illumination on, but that's such a limited window of the day. And the battery life in illuminated reticles, because they're running coin batteries like CR2032s usually, the battery life isn't very good. So if you accidentally leave that illumination on, even it could be as short as a day, depending on the runtime already and the scope itself and how much illumination you were running, it could be dead the next time you pick it up. So it's not something that I would rely on in the same way that I rely on the dot in a red dot.
And that being said, this is a second focal plane optic. On many of the first focal plane on 1 power, they're kind of relying on that battery to be alive to use the dot. So if you don't have the power on, the reticle at 1 power is almost unusable.
So with the first focal plane optics and their reticles, because they grow equally in relation to the target. They grow in tandem with each other to keep the image and the graduations true the entire time, or through the range of magnification, I should say. They end up being very thin when you are, quote, zoomed all the way out. So when you're back at 1x, the reticle's very, very thin, very fine, whereas the second focal plane is super, super bold because it is fixed and only the target is being magnified. Something to consider if 1x is of greater importance to you than the top end with 4, 6, 8, 10. That's something to consider for sure with the focal planes.
The next thing we have to talk about is mount height. Just like the red dot, there are multiple mount heights that you have to consider. This one has a 1.54 inch mount, but you can get them in a 1.7 inch mount or a 1.93 inch mount. Why would you consider some of those other mount heights?
I'd say for the same reasons that we do with a red dot, because it is especially imperative that we really get behind the gun the same way every time with a scope. If you cannot get behind the gun in your gear because it's a 154 and you're running a helmet and a plate carrier and you're shooting from the prone, it becomes difficult, and you start doing the ball cap tip with the ocular lens of your optic to push your helmet back. So I'd say if you are going to run just a low powered variable, I'd make sure that it is a mount height that you can use all the time, which a lot of people, that ends up being like a 1.7.
That's probably my preferred mount height for just using an LPVO with no other type of sighting systems. That 1.7 is pretty good to me. So some of the cons about this system, I think one of the obvious ones is going to be weight. This is going to be a lot heavier than just using a red dot.
Yeah, you are absolutely paying a penalty to get more performance out of this versus like a T2 on a little aluminum mount.
So another thing that we get with the LPVO is that we do have a diopter adjustment.
This is another point of adjustment for our visual clarity or acuity. So the scope is not going to appear the same to everyone at 1x, which a lot of people are going to set it at 1x and find where it falls in between the ranges. It's going to allow you to take whatever the scope came as out of the box, run this diopter, which I'm not actually going to adjust, and get like a nice flat image is a good way to think about it. So you don't have any of the bowl effect or the fisheye lens. If you were to run a fixed power or even a variable power that did not have a diopter adjustment, or like there are night vision units that do not have diopter adjustments like 31 alphas, you're kind of stuck. You're stuck with what you have. With night vision, you can get prescription inserts that are very expensive, or you're going to have to wear your corrective lenses. But even with a scope, because now we're looking through magnified lenses, you may not be able to, quote, like flatten the image quite like you want to. So a diopter adjustment it's something else you have to mess with, but it is something that is going to give you the clearest, most acute image possible.
So you did mention night vision use. How easy is it to use night vision with this setup that we have here?
Inline night vision, very easy. Head-mounted night vision, I almost wouldn't bother.
So we do have some options that will gain us some more capabilities with the LPVO system. And what we have here is the LPVO with the offset red dot.
At this point, we're not really augmenting an existing sighting system or enhancing one. We're just adding another one to it. Outside of something like the Alpha Terac or a Prism that you put in front of a scope, you don't really augment scopes. Adding a second optic is pretty much the easiest way to bolt on performance that the scope's not going to get you. This is going to give you, depending on the mount you select and the way you configure it, this one is on an Arisaka offset mount, so it's separate from the main mount. It's not a unimount setup. It's going to give you the ability to shoot through a gas mask more easily, passively aim through night vision more easily, and then just your weird positional stuff. So I don't really view this as a backup sighting system, although it is a second one, so it could serve that purpose. It's very much an alternate sighting system to fill the gaps that the LPVO leaves.
If you are shooting with it magnified and you do need to do a close shot, you do have that already just on a 1 power because it's a red dot, and you can just flip it over and start using that.
Yeah, so some people do like to use them like that. The ACOG dot combo, I've seen a pretty dumb one of the Elcan Spectre DR bad. The guy left it on 4 power all the time and had the dot. It's like you could have just run an ACOG for saving 25 ounces or something. So consider that between the variable powers and the fixed power if that's something you want to do. If you want dedicated magnification and dedicated dot, maybe you don't need to carry around the weight, but we'll get to fixed power optics later. But yeah, that is how I use it. And I run them both on 1 power, and then I'll just manually add to this.
What do you think is the big con with this setup? What would steer somebody away from this?
I don't know that there's necessarily a true con other than literal cost, or there may be a better option depending on what you want to do. If passive aiming and gas mask shooting is just of the utmost importance to you, but you also need to have a scope, we'll get to the top dot, but maybe the top dot's a better approach than the offset. But I do like that with offsets, I have adjustable height relative to stacking an optic on an optic. There's not much I can do about that.
So that's the offset option. We'll get into the top dot now, which is my preference compared to your preference of the offset. So here we have the LPVO with a top mounted red dot. This is the primary arms PLXC 1-8, and on top we have an aimpoint acro. What do you see the advantage of this style of setup?
So again, we're just adding a second optic. We've just chosen to put it in a different place. I would say the advantage is everything that you get out of tall mounts for red dots, you have basically just bundled your scope into a tall red dot mount. So again, gas mask, passive aiming, quote, heads up shooting, like you referenced. It is easier to shoot in certain positions with a tall dot or just a red dot that is further removed from the body of your gun. Can allow you to get behind it more easily versus trying to fit yourself into here. So even with the offset, even though that's tall, there are times that a top dot would be easier to get behind because you can pretty much just stand up straight and look through the optic.
People will run their LPVOs on either 1 power or max power, but I do it kind of different. I actually use my red dot on top as my primary aiming solution, and then I will leave the LPVO at 3.5 to 4 power, something where I'm not extremely magnified. So I can use the red dot, and then all I have to do is tuck my head a little bit to get behind a magnified optic, and then when I'm looking at something, I'm not too punched in. I could always punch in more if time allows, but I'm not extremely magnified when I tuck my head and look behind the optic. And like you said, shooting in prone, I think it makes it a lot easier to acquire the aiming solution by looking through the red dot. Sometimes you just can't get your head behind the scope because of the position that you're in and the equipment that you're wearing. So that pretty much covers everything that we can really do with the LPVO setup. So now let's get into the Prism Optics. So now we have Prism Optics, which are going to be fixed magnification scopes. They're not going to have that variable range, like a 1 to 4 or 1 to 6. It's going to be fixed at whatever it's at, whether it's 4 power or 3.5 power or whatever. There are some advantages to this. This one is a Trigicon ACOG. This is an older model, but there have been models that have been around the military for over 2 decades. So there's been a lot of use, especially with people in the military, using this style of optic. And why is this the best optic the military could use?
It is the best optic if it is literally the only optic available. So if you find yourself in that scenario, you have no choice. This is it, which is the case for a lot of service members. But
I will say, like, at the time, I'm glad I had it.
Yeah, in 1974, this thing was sick. But there's a lot better options now. But the pros of it, it's super light, it's super simple. So for general issue, I don't think this was a bad choice necessarily. There's no leveling to do. There's not a diopter to adjust, so pro and con there. But there's nothing to mess up.
There's less stuff to break.
Right, and they are extremely durable.
You're not having to put it in a scope mount like you would with an LPVO and have it perfectly leveled, which a lot of people in the military just would mess that up.
Right. We are assuming that Trigicon makes all these perfectly leveled. But
we are assuming that.
Yeah, but there's nothing for you user error-wise to do wrong, at least with this kind of like unimount, flat bottom prism style optic like an ACOG. So they're super light, they're super durable, they're very simple. So the Marine Corps bought 10 million of them. But
yeah, so there are downsides though, and the biggest one is going to be the eye relief. So you think you're going to be running your stock out like this, but you're really going to have to be like that. There just really is a very short eye relief with this style of optic.
yeah, there are other options. You know, we're definitely biasing the conversation towards like the 4X or like the M150 RCO style of ACOG.
Mm-hmm.
The 3.5 power, I did the math once, it was like 20% more weight for like 60% more eye relief. So if eye relief is the number one issue, there are other options if you're dead set on a prism or a fixed power. But you start creeping into, is this heavy enough that I should just get a variable power optic?
I think in most cases, you know, more people are going to be better off with that variable power optic. They're going to have more capabilities. Now, that being said, you know, having the ability to mount a red dot on top of the prism scope does make it pretty attractive for some people because they are saving quite a bit of weight and maybe they don't need that higher range of magnification. So that is a pro there.
Yeah, you get similar qualities to the top dot on a variable, on a ring. Most of the prisms that take top dots, it's easier to install immediately. There's usually some kind of stud or something that you can just screw on immediately. Mm-hmm. So if you have the dot and the mount, which will often come as a kit, depending on where you are in the DoD, you have all the little pieces, you just bolt it on right there. You don't need to buy a specialized ring and re-level your stuff. If you've got the bit and you have the red dot, you just put it right on there. So that's attractive. There's other prisms, like your larger prisms for machine guns, that have just pick rail on top. Mm-hmm. So that's a common approach. The red dot on top of a fixed power optic is a very common pairing. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad pairing. Mm-hmm. I more have bad things to say about the 4X ACOG.
Honestly, if it had better eye relief and, you know, that 4 or 5 power with a dot on top, I would find that very attractive. What really steers me away from it really is the eye relief.
Yeah, I would say that, and the cost of what the technology was versus what it is now, it has never really deflated.
No.
But other than that, if the eye relief was good, cost notwithstanding, it would be an excellent option because the weight is super, super attractive.
So, you know, this specific model does have a quick detach mount. So we can take this off and get to our iron sights here. Are these necessary? Do people need these on their gun?
I'd say if there's nothing stopping you from having them on there and you put them in a spot where you can actually access them and use them and they're zeroed and you've shot with them, there's no downside necessarily other than it's just something that you have to buy.
A little bit of real estate, a little bit of weight.
Yeah, but if they become an issue for higher priority pieces of equipment on your gun, so you can't get your optic far back enough, you can't get your magnifier far back enough, I'd say the irons are getting voted off the island first for me. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to kick off a magnified or unmagnified optic or a magnifier to save my rear sight.
Right.
And I'm not going to forego my laser to keep a front sight.
Now, should somebody who's first getting into firearms, should they get the iron sights or should they get the red dot?
The red dot. The iron sights, just because they're old, so anything, whatever's the oldest, people will say is, quote, fundamental. Like this would be to some, 1981 Coast Guard boomer. This would be the fundamentals of shooting. Would be shooting even better fixed irons, right? Carry handle.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. I think it's harder to learn. It's a less capable system, and it's not the best way to be introduced to shooting. I don't find iron sights to be a necessary fundamental of shooting. We talked about if you had to teach one guy to shoot in a week, and Kevin had to teach another guy to shoot in a week, and we went red dots and irons, who's going to qual better at the end of that? The red dot's a more capable system.
And very reliable at this point.
Yeah, the technology is super mature. Iron sights can break. Like, these things are not without their flaws. They're The plastic ones I've seen knocked off of guns just by hand. The rail grabber could be a weak point. These are pretty nice irons. There's metal ones out there. Some of them don't always want to stay up. Like the Knights iron sights come to mind, as expensive and cool as they are.
Especially with the flip ups, you're going through the house, you bump this on something, now your front sight's down. Or this one happens to just come up and down. If you have to press some type of button to let it go down, and then you hit your iron sight on something, now it's just breaking that.
Right. So if someone was going to default to iron sights as their primary aiming system, I would say fixed irons would make the most sense. Most people are not running fixed irons as their backups. There are some people that do just have a fixed rear and a front sight post, and they're just using the optic in a lower third mount. Not as common anymore, but if you're running flip ups, I'm going to assume that they're backups, and I would say make sure they're accessible and make sure you shoot them.
I find them to be less necessary, especially with something like the LPVO with top dot. I have two sighting solutions. If one fails, I still have the other. So I find that not as necessary for something like that. For a standalone red dot, I kind of see it as like, it's still pretty viable, especially if you have the taller mount that you can aim through, or you have like a co-witness.
I shouldn't say they're not viable, but I would say they are in no way competitive with any of the other optic solutions we talked about.
I know the Big Pro.
Go ahead.
They don't fog up.
They don't fog up. That's true. They just fold down.
So that wraps it up for the sighting systems. We want to know, what is your preferred setup? So leave a comment below. Let us know which one of these rifles you would take. Thanks for watching. Please like the video and subscribe if you can, and we'll see you on the next one.